Well, there you are, and here I am. I'm back. Look out. In answer to all of your questions, yes, Linda and I had a nice time in Florida. It was a little chilly, but I'm somewhat fearful of saying that, lest you pull a hymnal out of the pew rack in front of you and throw it at me, because you had 3 months of tough, harsh winter weather. So yes, our winter weather in sunny Florida was wonderful in comparison to yours. We are glad to be home. It's always nice to go, but it's even better to come home. Now today I have a favor to ask of you. I just got back and I'm asking a favor. I served for 5 years as the pastor of the Grace United Methodist Church in Coshocton, Ohio, and I retired from full-time ministry in 2001 from that church, some 14 years ago. This year, they are celebrating their 175th year of ministry to that struggling town, Coshocton. Actually, this church is 20 years older than that church. This is your 195th year of ministry to this community. So, because it's their 175th year of ministry, they have asked me to come back and preach for them. I don't know what's wrong with them that they would do such a thing, but they did. That date was confirmed before I agreed to become your interim pastor last September, by the way. So what's the favor? Well, I've written a sermon for that occasion, and I have entitled it, "We Need This Church." And I want you to hear it. So I'm asking you to pretend that you're the congregation down in Coshocton, and you're listening to Clark Candle, who was your pastor for 5 years and has come back because you've asked him to come back, okay? And I'm going to give this sermon to them, and I want you to hear the sermon as well, because it applies to you just as much as it applies to them. So your job is to see whether or not this sermon makes any sense as I give it next Sunday. Do you understand that assignment? That's your job. Okay. I don't know whose idea it was to invite me back, but whoever it was is a courageous person, and I thank him or her for the invitation. It's a wonderfully emotional experience for pastors to look out there and see all of you, because pastors get invited to incredible places in the lives of people. I baptized some of your children. I buried some of your relatives. I officiated at the marriages of some of you, and I listened to the sorrows and the joys that you wanted to share with me, and I served the Lord's table with you. Being a pastor is not always easy, but it is seldom boring. So to see your faces and to remember how we prayed our way through the landscapes of being the people of Christ in Coshocton, Ohio, is a privilege not easily described, but greatly prized by this old preacher. Miss Linda, my first wife. That's an old joke. I've been using it for 45 years, for heaven's sakes. It's an old joke. Miss Linda and I recently returned from Florida. We usually go after Christmas and stay for 12 weeks. But this year, it was reduced to 9 weeks, because sometimes life gets in the way. Do you understand that language? Sometimes life gets in the way. My 98-year-old mother passed to her heavenly rest late in December of 2014, and my dad went into immediate decline upon her death, and he had to be taken out of his apartment and moved over to assisted living. They were 6 months shy of celebrating 80 years of marriage, and so we needed to get him resettled. And I felt guilty about leaving him so soon after all of that was happening. I did it, but I did it with considerable hesitation. We stayed for 9 weeks because our son Mark was facing and is facing a difficult divorce. Difficult is the definitive word there because there is no easy divorce. And we wanted to be here for him, and so we came home early. Now, I tell you this not because I want you to feel sorry for the candles, but to tell you that sometimes life gets in the way. You understand? Linda and I are not unique in this business of living. You too have parents, or did have. You too have delayed trips or outings long planned that had to be postponed or shelved because life got in the way. Or you have children who are going through what you thought or hoped they might avoid, and they didn't avoid. And so you worry about them, and you fuss over them, and you pray for them. You implore God to protect and to guide and to counsel them because you know and you understand that there is only so much that we can do. You learned, as we all must learn, that every life is unique, every life is different, and every life is the same. And you have to say that all in one sentence. It's different, and yet it's the same. And that though you love them, that is your children, it's their life and not yours. Yes, we love them, be they our parents or our children or our neighbors or our friends. Yes, we love them, and sometimes they will let us hold their hands, and sometimes they will even listen to what we have to say to them. And we want them to know, nevertheless, it's their life and it's not our life. It's theirs. They have to live their life. And we have to live ours. One of the things that I like to do when we go south to Florida is to read. So I had 9 weeks to read, and the first book I read was a mystery. Now, I really don't like mysteries. I think life has enough mystery all on its own. I don't need any more. But I started this book. I didn't want to finish it, but I'd been told somewhere that when you start something, you ought to finish it, so I finished it. The second book was entitled The Divide. The Divide, by Nicholas Evans. He is also the author of The Horse Whisperer. Some of you know about that book, The Horse Whisperer. He's a wonderful, excellent writer. The book begins out west at the Continental Divide. Now, the Continental Divide is that spot on the continent high up into the mountains where some of the melted snow water empties into the Pacific Ocean, and some of the waters flow east and empty into the Gulf of Mexico. Actually, I did that wrong. That's west over there, isn't it? East. Well, anyway, you get the idea. But the Continental Divide, in his book, is only a metaphor. The real divide that Nicholas Evans wants to explore is the divide in the marriage of Sarah and Benjamin Cooper. Sarah is the daughter of New York money. She's a graduate of Wellesley College. Benjamin was raised in Abilene, Kansas. His parents operated a hardware store. Benjamin had aspirations of becoming a film actor, but he discovered early on that he was not particularly good under the camera, and he wasn't very good at acting either. So he headed off to Syracuse University to study architecture. Now, Sarah's father had expected her to marry an Ivy League man. After all, we're talking about New York money here. Not some schlep from Syracuse, which he dubbed the University of Nowhere. Not some nobody whose parents ran a hardware store, for heaven's sakes. Come on, Sarah, he said. You can do better than that. But Sarah did not want to do better than that. She and Ben fell in love, and they married, and they had 2 children. Ben did well in his work, quite well, as a matter of fact. Yet though she loved him and always would love him, he was not quite sufficient in ways that were impossible for her to explain to anyone, not even to herself. She hurt him, and he hurt her, and neither one of them could say exactly why. There were, as I said, 2 children. They had a daughter, Abby. Are you getting all this? You understanding all this? You following me? They had a daughter, Abby. She was their first child. She was gifted, bright, beautiful, sensitive, passionate about the world, passionate about its profound beauty and our need to take care of it. The second child was a son, Joshua, some 3 years younger. And if things came easily to Abby, as they did, there was no carryover to Joshua. He was unlike his sister. He seemed slower, more awkward, not so much so that he was an embarrassment to the family, just enough that people noticed. They were different. Now it was Benjamin, who waited until Abby was in college, 22 years into the marriage, when he decided that he had had enough of Sarah's unspoken superiority. He was tired of being hurt, and he was tired of hurting his wife, and he was going to ask for a divorce. Didn't he deserve some happiness? Didn't he deserve someone who could and would respond to him without making him feel tarnished or lackluster or maybe even second class? But before he had the guts to tell the family what he was about to do, he decides to visit his sister and to tell his sister what was on his mind and what he was about to do. And he does this hoping that she, of all people, will understand and that she will be on his side of the equation. It turns out that that was a bad choice. It was a bad choice. After he tells her what he wants her to know, she is quiet for an awkwardly long time. And then finally she speaks. And she tells him that he has been duped by this ridiculous upside-down culture in which everyone is constantly bombarded by the false and pernicious promise of happiness, that people have the right to be happy. Every dumb TV show fueling greed and envy, making people dissatisfied with what they have, leading them to believe that they could be happy if only they got themselves a new car, or maybe a new dishwasher, or they could be happy with a new outfit, or a new lover. What gives you the right to leave, Ben? She asks. Do you know any married people who are happy, really happy? He starts to answer her question. Well, he says, but she's not done, and she's not going to listen. Do you think that our parents were happy, Ben? Of course they weren't, but that doesn't mean you just up and leave. Come on, Ben, you idiot, get real. Oh, I'm so unhappy, boo-hoo. Hey, I'll just walk out on my wife and my kids. Where do you get that, Ben? Well, it was a bravo performance, don't you think? It's as though she were waiting all her life to give that speech, and suddenly her brother offered her the opportunity to give the speech. It was a bravo performance, worthy of an Oscar. Now, you might think that that speech turned him around, but you'd be wrong. No, he had already made up his mind. So the rest of the book is an examination of what follows as a result of the divide, the separation, the divorce. The book is not an easy one to read because you, the reader, are required to think with unblinking eyes about what it means to be married, to have children, and whether or not anyone has the right to pull out when the marriage goes south. Do you have the right to pull up stakes, to fold the tent, seek happiness in another bed with another partner? Or do you stay the course with your first choice and work on bridging the divides, the gaps that exist in every relationship, knowing full well, all the while, that you yourself are a big part of the problem? hear all that? All right, now, if you're not asking, you ought to be asking about this time, what does any of this have to do with the 175th anniversary of our church? It's a fair question, and I'm going to try to tell you. So here's this preacher, this one right here. Here's this preacher reading this book. The book is all about morality. The book is all about asking big questions. It abounds in concerns, not so much about legalities, but what is right? And what are the consequences? And finding ways to live with the decisions we all have made. What's interesting to this preacher is that God is not evoked in this book. The only time God is mentioned is when is used, the word God is used in profanity. At no time do any of the personalities in the novel seek God's counsel, nor do they ponder God's will or seek God's forgiveness. What's interesting to this preacher is that fewer and fewer of your neighbors, fewer and fewer of your children are willing to say, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." Fewer and fewer of your neighbors are willing to echo the words embedded in the 34th Psalm, "I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. Let us exalt his name together." And this preacher worries. I worry about a godless America. I worry about the American psyche that suggests that we no longer need the discipline of worship. We no longer have need to pray for our children. We no longer have need to sing the songs of faith. I worry about that. I don't know whether I should or not, but I do. This church, now remember, I'm talking to the folks down in Coshocton now. This church was launched 175 years ago, back at a time, 1840 to be exact, when this country was experiencing a great divide. The divide was called slavery. There were people back then who believed that God was in the divide, that you couldn't go anywhere without God being there. So God was in the divide. There were people back then who believed that we needed the discipline of worship and prayer, and that we needed to sing the songs of faith, and that we needed to baptize our children and teach them something about the Old and the New Testaments, and to teach each other about both the words and the deeds of the living Christ. There were people back then who sacrificed their futures and their fortunes that this church might be launched, that it might be a lamp unto our path and a light to those smothered in darkness. There's a lot has changed between 175 years ago and today. A lot has changed, and you know about that. I don't have to tell you all that's changed. You know about that. But not everything has changed. Oh, no. Sin is still sin. And hurt is no different today than it was 3,000 years ago when the 34th Psalm was written. There is a divide out west. It's called the Continental Divide. But the divide that really matters to people like you and me is the divide that appears when we get to thinking that we are somehow so wealthy, so powerful, so educated, so sophisticated that we no longer need to present ourselves at the foot of the cross. Do you understand? And I'm here today to tell you that we need this church. We need this church to be the voice of the living Christ as it seeks to minister to our arrogant culture. And I'm here to remind you of the words of Jesus, because I want his words to be the true voice of this sermon. So listen again. Listen again to what Jesus says to the apostle Paul. He says to Paul, I love this. Stand on your feet, Paul. Rise. Stand on your feet. I have appeared to you for this purpose, to anoint you to serve and to bear witness to the things in which you have seen me. I send you out to open the eyes of people and to receive the forgiveness of sin. That's what he said. Those are the words of Jesus. That was the message 2,000 years ago. It was the message 175 years ago. It still is, because there is a massive need for healing the divisions that arise, the divisions that reside deep in the hearts of the human family. And if we can remember that, if we can bear witness to that simple call to open the eyes and to receive forgiveness, we will be a blessing to this culture and to the world that we all inhabit. I have not come back here to tell you how wonderful you all are, and I certainly have not come back here to tell you how shabby you all are. I'm simply here to say that we have work to do, and it's big work, and it's important work. That's why I'm here. I have this profound sense that the average lay person, and some of our clergy as well, have lost the concept of how important the church is to the culture. I know that the church is important to some of you individually, but I'm talking about the church being in this culture. How important the church is for the body politic, how important the church is for a free society, how important the church is for those who are poor and those at the margins of our culture. And I'm here to speak for those who have lost their vision, the wealthy. How important it is for the wealthy, because some of them have lost their compassion. And they're all caught up in greed. I don't want the church to forget. I don't want you to forget. I don't want to forget. I don't want people to think that they're so good that they no longer need the discipline of worship. Well, that work of reminding people what we're about is so important that and it's so big that we will never accomplish it on our own. And so we will seek God's blessing as we set out to accomplish our mission. And it would be my hope, and it would be my prayer that we would remember and that we not forget how important we are for the task we have in Jesus Christ. Well, that's what I want to say to them. That's what I wanted to say to you as well. Your job is to decide whether or not it's worthy. And the people all said? Amen. You're getting good at that.